I'm joined by Josiah for the segment. So great. So let's jump right in. There used to be, Josiah, what appeared to be some mutual respect between Sean Hannity, Fox News propagandist, and Governor of California, Gavin Newsom. Even though obviously they're very politically different, they had a good back and forth, I guess.
On the bromance scale, on a scale of like 0 to us, like they were like at least a solid 7, I think. Solid 7 at one point.
I don't like that implies one of us is Hannity. Yes. So that has gone away, that mutual respect, whatever it was. And I think some of that came from the DeSantis-Newsom debate where Sean Hannity rigged it in DeSantis's favor.
You mean the DeSantis-Newsom-Hannity debate?
Right.
I gotcha. Yeah.
Exactly. And now things have really fallen apart further. And this is in regards to the Alabama IVF ruling that ruled that fertilized frozen embryos are human beings. So you can imagine that's already causing Alabama IVF centers to have to be shut down and so many negative implications of that. Another example of the danger of these far-right extremists even in the judiciary. And so Newsom had something on CNN just reasonable to say. And then Hannity heard that he said that and went out on his show and melted down. So first, let's look at what Newsom had to say.
Speaking of courts, the Alabama Supreme Court ruled that frozen embryos are children. They invoked the wrath of a holy God in their decision. Of course. Multiple clinics in the state are now pausing their IVF treatments as a result. You called the decision sickening.
Yeah, of course.
What are Democrats going to do about it, if anything?
Well, we'll continue to be on the offense. We're backed up by the American people. We're backed up post-Dobbs. You just see these Republican parties on the defense on this issue for good reason, because the American people have had it. This extremism manifested, the ultimate extremism, on the issue that impacts 1 out of every 6 people that in their lifetime have fertility issues. And this is profound. And you talk about freedom, spare me, the Republican Party and this freedom gospel. What about family freedom? What about the right of people that want to start a family? And think about this, Jake, you know this, everybody knows this. You saw the stats, 65,000 births due to rapes since Dobbs in 14 states. Apparently, what the Republican Party is saying is the rapists have more rights to bring those babies to birth than families that are trying desperately to have the privilege you and I have had as fathers and parents. It is a disgrace, and it's a political problem for them, but it's a moral issue. And I found what happened in Alabama disgusting. And by the way, you have an AG in Alabama that also is out there promoting a travel ban that wants to criminalize travel for anyone that seeks an abortion out of state. That's how extreme the state of the Republican Party is.
So I do want to say before we play Hannity's meltdown response, I think that what Gavin Newsom had to say on CNN, I thought that that was an extremely effective political message. I mean, we're just seeing it in its infancy, but the idea that framing as an issue that, according to far-right Republicans, rapists have more reproductive rights than people trying to actually conceive children, I think that's going to be a very powerful message and will help maximize a policy area, reproductive rights, abortion, in which Democrats already have an outsized advantage. Yep. So I just thought that it was very powerful, which might explain Hannity's response.
Take a look.
I'll tell you, the comments yesterday made by Gavin Newsom about how Republicans are putting rapists ahead of the women that they impregnate. By the way, Gavin, repulsive statement by you. And coming from you, I've got to be honest, frankly, every crime committed in your sanctuary state of California, including raping and the murders that have taken place, illegal immigrants, that is because of your policies, Joe's open borders, where they literally are allowing unvetted illegal immigrants from Iran and Syria and Afghanistan and Egypt and Russia and China to cross our border. He bears that responsibility, and Joe Biden bears that responsibility. And God forbid, you know, among those nearly 10 million illegals unvetted in this country, we wake up one morning like we did in 2001 on 9/11, and there's an attack. The likelihood of that is growing every day we do not secure the border. Yeah. That border must be secure. And I have a big announcement about that on Monday.
So a lot to go through there. Let's try to keep everything in our head that he just said. My goodness. First, I want to say, and I'll throw it to you, Josiah. I'm sick of this faux performative outrage. You espouse harmful positions, radical, extreme positions, even just based on, like you mentioned, the polling. compared to other Americans, people like Hannity are pushing for extreme positions. Then you go on your show after being called out for it and act like you're the one being slighted. It's that ultimate victimhood thing we see from Trump and a lot of those within the MAGA movement, where instead of thinking about why do you think it is that Newsom worded that way, think about the point that he's making, the women that the policies you advocate for are harming. But no, it's Hannity who's personally slighted. And you could notice how aggravated he was, not because I think he's actually that upset about him being called out for his extreme positions, but instead because he knows how true potentially, or at least rhetorically effective, what Newsom said was.
Yeah, I think he definitely, Hannity's not an idiot. He can just do a really good impression of one. So he recognizes that, again, when it comes to reproductive rights, Democrats enjoy a colossal advantage because Republicans are the dog that caught the car. And I think he realizes that if Newsom's rhetoric starts to become adopted by the Democratic Party, it's going to maximize that outsized advantage. I think he sees that, and that's why he's afraid. But again, his disgust is more with the effective rhetoric than the truth behind the rhetoric. And then what's funny is then the bromance just disintegrates right then and there. And you can see he turns to Gavin. He's like, Gavin, I am just appalled. What a despicable statement, as if Fox doesn't make despicable statements against Democrats, blue cities, blue states, California all the time.
Yeah,
and then he reciprocates. Yeah. And then he tears into a bunch of things where...
That point reminds me, and then we'll get to his comments about undocumented immigration, the ridiculous double standard of Republicans say the most vicious things about blue states, about the just disgusting, crime-ridden disaster that blue states and blue cities are. It's constant. Right. And that across the board surprises no one, and you don't hear segments of really any of those on the left be like, stop going after my... You cannot imagine a Republican or a Democrat doing that with red areas. Going after Alabama. I was in Alabama. It was just, you would never hear that. And it would be a controversy across the political spectrum. CNN, MSNBC would be outraged if Biden said such a thing. And the thing is, Biden doesn't believe that, which is a part of it. And if we are going to compare states, we don't have to get into all the data that we've gone through so many times in the past here, but it's just true on all the big metrics. The struggling states are red states run by Republicans. It's not the citizens' fault, but their elected leaders. I wish they would stop voting for them. But address just some of what he was talking about with undocumented immigration. First of all, being a big whataboutism, how does that address at all IVF?
Right, yeah, that's how you can tell it was emotional. He was like, well, I don't like it either, yeah. What about the border? And then, so what's so funny, because Republicans have made themselves, especially in light of recent events, really vulnerable to a line of attack when you consider that Republicans tanked. They torpedoed a bipartisan, relatively conservative border bill spearheaded by one of the most conservative Republicans in the Senate, whom Donald Trump, Sean Hannity's hero, endorsed in his election because he was so conservative on the border. And Republicans tanked it because they want to use it as a wedge issue. And then he's trying to shift responsibility. He's like, it's Joe Biden's open borders, it's Gavin Newsom's open borders. Well, even if we grant the premise, which we never should, because Republican officials and Fox News propagandists are almost always wrong on the facts, but even if we generously grant the premise, well, then by definition, don't Republicans bear responsibility for it, given that they torpedoed a bill endorsed by the conservative, anti-Biden, pro-Trump border union that was designed to deal with this? Don't you all bear responsibility if everything else you said was true? But no, of course not, because again, Hannity grades Republicans on curves. And then to set nothing aside, to set aside the fact that illegal undocumented migrants actually commit crimes at lower rates compared to American natural born citizens. It's incredibly frustrating. And then of course the thing at the end about a 9/11.
They've been, I don't like saying this because it is so beyond anything we could imagine doing.
That's true.
The way they breathlessly, seemingly root on something horrible happening, and it's stunning. I will say, too, to debate on their ground, even though there's so much more to the broader immigration conversation.
This is why I said that he was going to be the Hannity of the bromance here. You see what I'm saying? That's why I said that at the end.
If we're going to go there, it is funny that they're not even wrong about, or they are really wrong, they're not even correct about like you said, the premise where if we granted that the border is being managed the way they're saying that it is, then they would definitely want to fix that with the very bill that Border Patrol said would be a dream, best in decades that we've seen Congress do. But they shot it down. And Langford said a conservative pundit called him and threatened to destroy him if he tried to get this bill through. So maybe that was Sean Hannity. That's who I speculate.
Or Laura Ingraham or somebody at the Fox Propaganda Network. It was certainly on the payroll. But again, to me, my issue with the 9/11 comment is it's really gross for a couple of reasons. Number one, it hasn't happened yet. So I don't know why Republicans keep prophesying that such a thing will happen when there's no guarantee it will, number one. Number two, you may recall a few months ago, there was that car explosion on a bridge in New York, and Republicans pounced on it, saying, oh, it's a terrorist attack, And it turned out the FBI was like, no, it's not a terrorist attack at all. But let's just call it for what it is. It seems like among the right, there is this appetite for a terrorist attack on President Biden's watch so they can use it again as a wedge issue. And then I go back to the actual 9/11. When 9/11 occurred, the expectation of Republicans was you unite behind the sitting president, who at the time happened to be a Republican, George W. Bush. Now is not the time for partisan divides. You unite when America comes under attack. Republicans will not do that under a Democrat. I have absolutely no faith in that whatsoever, that even if the worst case scenario occurred, which God forbid it hopefully will not, they will use it as a wedge issue instead of uniting politically.
It is the change in eras for sure. And when a Republican is in power and a crisis happens, Democrats are like, you know what? Yeah, let's unite around this. And then we saw an attempt at that during COVID until things just started going nuts and became this whole political issue. But I forgot to finish out my point about not granting the premise. Just so you know, you were more likely as a migrant to be released during the Trump administration than during Joe Biden's administration. So yes, we've seen in recent years, for a bunch of complex reasons that could be the subject of a whole different conversation, a surge in migration to the southern border. President Biden's options or his responsibility is just in how he responds, right? And so he hasn't been saying, yeah, we're not going to enforce laws or any of these myths they've been pushing. But again, regardless of if we disagree on that, even though there are facts in this world and those are the facts, still, you really can't talk about it now, Hannity, Republicans, if you're the ones shooting down the very solution that the people you say you care about their opinion on, the Border Patrol, said this bill was exactly what they wanted and needed. And to your point about them then exploiting these crises, Border Patrol said after this bill was shot down, because it was shot down, they expect to have to release more people because they just can't hold the amount of numbers that we have, and they could have if this had gone through, but because it's not going to, they're going to release. What do you think Republicans are going to do whenever more migrants?
They're going to get even
fearmonger about it.
But again, they're going to get angry. They're going to fearmonger about it because again, I want to be very clear about this. And if you don't believe us, because we're liberals, we're lefties, whatever, we're in the pocket for Democrats, is what we're told. Go to the Cato Institute. It's a right-wing libertarian institute. David Beyer is a guy who has been talking about this since the Biden administration began, or really at the end of the Trump administration. The facts are there. The fact of the matter is that to the extent President Biden is, releasing undocumented migrants, it's because the detention facilities are overfull. So if the number of contacts at the southern border are increasing, right, but you only keep the manpower, resources, and policies the same, which they virtually are between the Trump administration and the Biden administration, just President Biden is more humane in his border enforcement. But if you don't actually, raise the manpower, resources, and policies to meet the moment, you're going to create a delta. And that's what we're experiencing. They want to pitch it that Joe Biden, for some sort of nefarious purpose, is allowing unvetted, undocumented migrants into the country for some nefarious reason. It was because they just don't have the means to hold them at the border.
And still, they were releasing a higher percentage. You were more likely to be released, under Donald Trump's administration, something that same guy has been pointing out. And just to be clear, when we say, sometimes I'm hesitant to talk about issues like this because there's so much I want to explain whenever we do get into them. But just to try to wrap this up, when we say release, it's because under international and U.S. law, we do have to hear out asylum claims, of course, And so while that process is happening before their court date, because it's backed up, because we don't have enough resources, because Republicans are obstructing resources,
Right.
then we have to release them before they come for their court date because we don't have enough facilities and enough resources.
Yeah, to be very, very clear about this, Luke and I are arguing from the position. What we're trying to demonstrate is from their own premises, their own logic.
Yep.
The conservative argument doesn't follow. The Republican argument doesn't follow. So
Yeah.
it's maddening. But I guess the romance is dead.
Which I'm happy about. I'm so sick of this. Let's not rant about this. This is a whole separate thing. Oh, my friends, my fellow, my colleagues, when they're doing the things they're doing. But we'll leave it there. Josiah, let them know where to find you.
YouTube.com/@ponderingpolitics. And hey, Luke, it's always good to collaborate with you,
Oh,
buddy.
it's fantastic.